as we've said, there's a big announcement tonight, and the rumors are going around. If you only knew the things I've heard. Evidently, I'm getting fired. I hear something different every day. What's going to happen next? Matt's getting fired. So we actually don't just have one big announcement tonight. We actually have two big announcements. And so I'm going to hit both of them tonight. First of all, let me give our first big announcement, and that is that this is going to be the last Yaz, because we're changing our name. I gotcha. Yeah, it was a good one. Wasn't it fun? Yeah, I like doing stuff like that. One time I convinced all the interns on their first day that they had joined a cult. But yeah, so this is going to be the last Jaws. And the reason we're dropping the name is, first of all, nobody knows what young adults is, all right? And I've joked often about that after service, they'll bring me this, like, pimple-faced high schooler. And they'll be like, oh, you're the young adults pastor, like, fix them. I'm like, I said pastor, not miracle worker. And the pimple-faced teenager will be like, and I'll be like, don't worry, like, I don't like you either. It's fine, And Alex, come get this, So I get that anyway. So nobody knows what young adults is, so it just creates constant confusion that we're 20s and 30s and 18 and 19-year-olds. We love 18 and 19-year-olds. And so we are going to change our name, and from henceforth, we will be known as, drum roll, The Exchange. Yes, The Exchange. So we're going to go by The Exchange from now on, our 20s and 30s ministry of Grace Community Church. And people are like, why The Exchange? What's the story with The Exchange? Okay, so this comes from one of my favorite quotes from one of my favorite old dead dudes, Martin Luther. So he's one of my heroes. So he's got this quote, and it's one of the most impactful quotes on my entire life. He said this: "This is the mystery which is rich in divine grace to sinners, wherein by a great exchange, this great exchange between sinners, our sins are no longer ours, but Christ's. And the righteousness of Christ, not Christ, but ours." That he's saying this is the best deal that has ever happened. You give Jesus all of your sin, all of your issues, all of your shortcomings, and in exchange, he gives you his righteousness and his beauty. I mean, it's spectacular. It's the greatest deal that's ever happened, and my goal is that you would have your heart fascinated by it, that you would be transformed by it, and that we would discover it every week. We're called The Exchange because every time we come together, we celebrate the exchange. When I have somebody preach for me, it's kind of cool because I get to talk about like what really makes me tick in preaching. And I always say, like, we preach the gospel, the good news of this great exchange in every single sermon. And people are like, do you really have to preach the gospel in every sermon? And it's like, I get to preach the gospel in every sermon. Like, this is the best news that God gave everything for me. It's spectacular. And so that is the first piece of big news. And everything is, in terms of our mission, stays the same. But we all do everything we do to celebrate this great exchange. We discover Jesus in our gathering ends, which you're at right now, second and fourth Tuesdays here at Lakewood Ranch. We're still doing that. We're still doing spiritual formation, forming you spiritually, getting your heart close to God through groups, and we're going to have a retreat this year. We're still doing making an impact through our outreaches and our big events, the big Christmas in New Orleans coming up. Second announcement about the exchange. There's been a decision that I have been gun-shy on for a while that I've known I needed to make. I knew I needed to do it, and I just wasn't quite ready. And I've been toying with the idea of doing this for a minute, and then something happened that just, it pushed me over the edge. Gosh, I guess it was about 2 months ago now, we saw the Gabby Petito story break. And this girl who is, in her 20s in Northport, Florida, a few miles down the road. And what happens is she and her boyfriend are just this perfect microcosm of life in your 20s and 30s in terms of you're making these huge decisions about who to marry, who to trust, what to do with your life. And the whole thing ends in a tragedy with, she's trusted the wrong people, and they found her body not too long ago, and then they find his body not too long ago. And it's just this really terrible story. And I was alone one night in my house just watching the news and thinking about it. And as I'm doing this, I got convicted about the fact that I was looking at it's Northport. That's not near this campus. That's 20 minutes away from the Bee Ridge campus. Like when we've done stuff at Bee Ridge, we've had people from Northport that would come, right? That's like within the shot of people we reach. And it hit me, like she could have come to a young adult event. They could have come to young adults. They could have come here, heard the gospel, got encountered, but their lives went a radically different direction. And as I'm just like watching the news, I got stirred that like we've got to open up something at the Bee Ridge campus. We've got to do something at the Bee Ridge campus. We've got to do something to expand the reach there. We've got to do something to reach that part of the community. It's growing, and it's growing even more with young adults in some ways than this part of town. And we've got to see God do something there. And so we're announcing tonight is we're going to do Yaz at Bee Ridge. We're going to do the exchange at Bee Ridge. We're also going to keep it here. So Lakewood Ranch, second and fourth Tuesdays, this is going to continue to happen. And then we'll also add an identical worship experience at Bee Ridge. And so we're super excited about that. Those of you that are closer to the Bee Ridge area, we want to see what God does through this. We want to reach more people. I mean, I'm talking every week to people that are saying, like, coming to these gathering ends is changing my life. They're talking about these messages are showing them how the gospel impacts their life in powerful, powerful ways, that we're speaking right to where they are. People are talking about how the worship here is powerful. Like Joseph, it's just, yeah. God's doing something incredible, and this is our opportunity to expand and reach more people. And so, and we're at capacity for this room. We're about to have the fire marshal come. We're hitting 90 people frequently in here, and that's the capacity of this room. And we had Yaz at the Ridge a few weeks ago, and we had 115 people show up. And we're hoping that God does that over and over again at Bee Ridge. And so we're super excited, and we can't wait to move forward. We're going to keep everything at Lakewood Ranch the way it is. We're just adding stuff at Bee Ridge. So this is like daunting for me. Like, oh my gosh, like, this is a big move. This is a big expansion. What are we going to do? How are we going to do this? What does this look like? And so before we dive in tonight, the purpose of this message tonight is I want to talk about leadership. And I'm defining successful leadership, and it's for the purpose of us talking about this move into Bee Ridge, this move into the exchange and everything we're doing, because I want to get some things right before we keep moving. Now, when I say leadership, a lot of you are tuning out and you're like, not me, I don't get a paycheck from the church. I am not talking about getting a paycheck from the church. I'm not talking about me and Logan and Joseph. I'm talking about when I say leadership, I mean any of you that have a call to have an impact through your life, any of you that have any kind of desire for influence, any of you that want to make your life count for something more than just going to work and coming home and eating and falling asleep watching Netflix, right? Like, I'm talking about anybody that has any inkling in your heart to make an impact and to really influence people. And each and every one of you have more influence than you realize. You have a sphere of influence. You have friends. You have coworkers that you impact in ways you don't realize. I share this from my personal story, and I suspect that most of you in this room relate to this. From the moment I was born, my earliest memories, like I knew like I had to do something with my life. The worst thing that I could ever dream of is just saying like, well, made a salary, retired, played golf, and died. Like that is the biggest like travesty that I could think of, right? I knew like I want to be a part of something special. I want to do something incredible. And then when I got saved at 18, I was like 14, I knew what it was. Like, it was like Jesus touched my life in a powerful way and healed me of 100 things that I never thought would go away. And I just knew I had to tell everybody else about it. And I want to talk about leadership for where God's taking us, leadership for where God's calling us as a young adult ministry, and leadership with where we're going to really impact more people. I'm going to be talking from Matthew chapter 20, verses 20 through 28. Just quick overview. We're going to start off with 2 misconceptions on leadership that Jesus covers in these passages, and then we're going to hit a redefinition of leadership that he gives us in these passages. So if you want to follow along in your Bibles, you're welcome to. Then the mother of the sons of Zebedee came to Jesus with her sons. Now, mother of the sons of Zebedee, this is Salome, who would be one of the women at Jesus' tomb later on. And the sons of Zebedee, in case you're wondering, these are James and John. This is the 2 disciples, 2 of the 3 disciples that are the closest to Jesus in his inner circle. Now, they are, let me just point this out. Before they come to Jesus, before James and John come to Jesus, they're like fishermen. He calls them from being fishermen. They're not royal. They're not people that are expected to achieve much. They're just kind of called out of being fishermen to follow Jesus. She came to Jesus with her sons, bowing down and making a request of him. So she's about to ask something big. She wants him to say yes to whatever this is. And he said to her, "What do you desire?" Now, what an incredible moment. Jesus is looking at her and saying, "What would you like me to do? What do you want?" What would you do if Jesus looked at you and said, "What do you want? What do you want?" And here we see what she wants. She said to him, "Say that in your kingdom, these 2 sons of mine shall sit, one at your right and one at your left." All right? Now, what she does is she asks for them, the right hand, this is the position, and left hand, that's the number 2 in charge, left hand, right hand is number 2 in charge, left hand is number 3 in charge. This is this big request, like, I want in your kingdom for my children to have leadership. I want them to have influence. I want them to have authority. I want them to have power. Now, these are roles that are traditionally given to the son. Right hand, that's the sons. That's the heirs. I'm noting that. This is an heir language, inheritance language. That won't make sense for a minute, but hold on to that. She's saying, I want them to be heirs, right? But Jesus replied. So how's he going to respond to this? It's kind of an audacious request, all right? It's this request for leadership, for power. I've prayed things like this, okay? God, I want to be a leader. God, I want to have influence. Like, it's not a bad thing to pray, but here's his response. You do not know what you are asking. You have no clue what you're talking about. You don't even know what leadership is. What's he saying? He's saying, you have no clue what leadership means if you're asking for it. If you're asking for authority because you think it's this awesome opportunity to be awesome, you really don't know what you're asking for. If you think your life is going to be easier because you're given leadership, she's like, you don't have a clue what you're asking for. So we have this huge question, what the heck is leadership? What is leadership? What does it mean to be at God's right hand and lead alongside of him? And this is a question we've got to be asking. This is a question every single one of you should be asking for your own lives. What is leadership? What is influence in God's way? What does it look like? And here's how Jesus says. He says, you have no clue what you're talking about. And he continues with this question. Are you able to drink the cup that I am about to drink? Now, cup here is imagery for suffering. All throughout the Old Testament, it's the cup of suffering. Now, Jesus himself would suffer the cup of God's wrath poured out upon him. Now, they're not going to have that. But when he says this, are you able to drink the cup that I'm about to drink? He's like, are you able, you want to be a leader? Okay, are you able to suffer with me? Are you able to suffer with me? Are you able to go through pain with me? And they stupidly reply, we are able. They have no clue what they are saying. That's the first misconception that we see here about leadership. This is a misconception about leadership, number one. Leadership goes around suffering instead of through it. Leadership goes around suffering instead of through it. You think that if you got a promotion at work or if you had some more authority, you would suffer less. You actually suffer more. It actually makes life harder because the cup always comes before the throne. The cup always comes before the throne. They want the throne of sitting at Jesus' right hand, but they don't want the cup of his suffering. A lot of people want Jesus' throne, but not his cup. A lot of people want the throne of Jesus' leadership, but they don't want the cup of his sacrifice. They want the throne of being free from pain, but they don't want the cup of being shaped by suffering. They want the throne of Jesus' resurrection. They just don't want the cup of his crucifixion. They want the throne of Jesus' best days, but they don't want the cup of Jesus' hardest days. You have to realize this. A few chapters earlier in Matthew, Jesus had an opportunity to gain a throne before the crucifixion. Satan himself offered Jesus a throne. And Jesus himself turned down that throne. Why? Because he wanted to go God's way through the cup of suffering. He wanted to take the long route and go through the cup of suffering. Salome is asking for Jesus, for her sons to sit at Jesus' right and left hand, because she assumes that at Jesus' right and left hand are thrones. The great surprise that she doesn't realize yet is that at the right and the left hand of Jesus will be crosses. Crosses to bear, not thrones to revel in. What he's teaching them is this important truth, and that's that suffering comes before glory. A few years back, after Mother Teresa died, they found her journals. And the story of what happens in these journals, this will mess with your head. They open up these journals, and they're expecting these great stories of angelic encounters for Mother Teresa, and They're expecting her to talk about the beauty of God's presence and how she experienced it and the joy of all of this. And what they found in the life of Mother Teresa in her journals was that she often felt that God was distant, that she felt that God was far away from her, and she felt his absence. And she wrestled with this for a long time. She said, I've given my life to him. I've given my life to know him, to serve him. Yet I feel so distant from God. And many of you have felt that. Like, I feel like God is distant. I don't feel close to God. I've felt close to God, but I don't now. And she feels incredibly distant from God. But she eventually reached this conclusion. This will rock you. The reason she felt distant from God was because Jesus felt distant from God. And that the feeling of God's distance was actually God's nearness. That she could only truly know Jesus because she felt distant from God like he did. Because God turned his face away from Jesus on the cross. She felt God's distance, and she understood that moment for him in a spectacular way. That was actually her true intimacy with God. Now, that's a tough cross to bear. It's a very tough cross to bear because we don't realize that suffering is actually what leads to glory. Suffering is what forms you for leadership. I don't know if you've ever been around someone that hasn't suffered. They have no compassion. You cannot have compassion on people without suffering. Because without suffering, you cannot feel other people's pain. And without the ability to feel other people's pain, you cannot love them. You cannot care for them. And there's some of you out here tonight, and the reason you came to church is you had this question on your mind is, why must I suffer so much? Why do I feel like I suffer more than other people? Why has God allowed me to suffer? And you don't know this yet, but the reason he's allowed you to suffer is because he's preparing you for leadership. He's preparing you to have compassion on people, and he's preparing you to be a leader that can impact them because you care for them in the deepest parts of you, because you can look at their pain and you can feel it because you've been there, and you can love them in a way that you never could had you not borne the cup of suffering. Suffering is God's great gift to you. You just don't know it yet. But you'll remember these words one day, and you'll know it. Because only those who suffer with Jesus will lead with him. Only those who suffer with Jesus will ever lead with him. Jesus keeps on going in response to their, I want to be a leader. And can you drink this cup? Yes, we are able. And Jesus responds and he says to them, my cup you shall drink. Little did they know what these words meant. John would spend his life following Jesus, all ultimately to be exiled and thrown onto a prison island on Patmos. But little did he know that this is where God would use him the most, because this is where he would pen the book of Revelation as well as the Gospel of John. He could have never done it if he hadn't been in the pain of exile and prison and suffering. God would also use James, the other brother's life, in a spectacular way. Acts chapter 12 records that Herod had him slaughtered with a sword. He was the first to be slaughtered. And that this sick thing, that when the Jews saw him slaughtered, Herod saw how much delight it gave them. And so they decided to go and try to slaughter Peter. he would live a life that was formed by suffering, but he would ultimately write the book of James. I mean, this is spectacular. Only God could do this. Only God could do this with suffering. He continues. He says, you're going to drink the cup, but to sit at my right hand and at my left is not mine to give. It is for those, he's saying, it's not his job to grant right or left hand. It is for those for whom has been prepared by my Father. It's the Father's gift, not his gift. Again, just note, inheritance language. This is something that will be inherited from my Father. I'll explain that a little bit more later, but note that. After hearing this, the other 10 disciples became indignant with the two brothers. They're like, you jokers getting up here and being like, can I be the ones that lead the kingdom? Like, the audacity, I mean, it'd be like, kind of like if you had a parent and like your like sibling was like, can I like get, X, Y, and Z, like when you die and like all the good stuff. Like, I mean, you'd kind of like slap them and be like, you idiot. That's what they did. And here's Jesus' response. But Jesus called to them himself and said, you know that the rulers of the Gentiles, the rulers of the nations, they domineer over them. And those in high position exercise authority over them. He's saying they really control people, leadership around here. It is not this way among you. It is not this way among you. Who in this room has ever had a really bad boss? Okay, this is what he's talking about. And power can make people go crazy. I saw an interview with an ex-president of the United States, and I won't tell you which one because then half of you will hate me. But they asked this ex-president, they said, what is the most fascinating thing you learn when you become president? And he did not hesitate a bit. He goes, what happens is you're about to meet all of these world leaders and all of these heads of state, and you think, they've got to be like these very accomplished, like great people. Like they must, have some ability to seem really loving and caring to, climb to the top. They've got to be really competent and everything. And he goes, they're not. Most of the world leaders are crazy. Most of them are narcissists. Most of them are strange. They dress funny. They act weird. And you're like, oh my gosh, I didn't realize that the people in the world who have like bombs and like missiles and stuff are crazy, right? Like they're crazy and they like to lord it over people and they really enjoy their positions of power, And every time sometimes you get to peer into what really powerful people are like and you're like, oh my gosh, I didn't realize they're crazy, And Jesus is kind of acknowledging this phenomenon of like crazy people climb to the top and they really enjoy being in power because they think they're awesome. I was not planning on telling this story, but my dad's originally from Egypt, and I went to Egypt. People were like, have you ever been to Egypt? And unfortunately, I have. And the first time I went, I was actually 19, and this was like before the Arab Spring, which is a misnomer. But anyway, there's this guy, Hosni Mubarak, and he was the head of Egypt. And he had his picture plastered all over Egypt, right? Like everywhere you looked, there was another like picture of Hosni Mubarak. And he eventually got ousted, but I remember I saw this billboard, and he's like this fat Egyptian man, and he's in a suit, and he's got like these sunglasses on, and he's standing folding his arms like this. And behind him, he's got the pyramids, and he's got like Egyptian Air Force planes like flying over him like, I am awesome, And my dad was like, he thinks he's a big deal. He thinks, oh, I'm the president. This is a big deal. But look at what he leads. It's awful. It's Egypt, And so anyway, but it's like that authority like lording over power deal, right? And this is what Jesus is saying. This is like the norm of leadership that we think of is like you get to be awesome and you get to rule over people. He's like, it is not this way among you. Second misconception about leadership is about being served. Huge misconception about leadership is we think leadership is ultimately about being served. Now, it's not about being served. It's not about being at the top so that other people can do your bidding. I want to encourage you, and then I want to say something that's going to make a lot of you PO'd, and some of you won't be back in 2 weeks, but I'm going to say it anyway. A lot of you have this extreme hunger for God and this beautiful thing where you love church services. You're constantly at church services. You're at churches here, and it's incredible. It's awesome. I love church services. I love going, hearing somebody talk about God. I love seeing God's power in worship. I love it. But what you do is you're I like the worship at this church, so I go to this church for the worship, and I like the teaching here and the teaching there, and you kind of have this smorgasbord of wherever you like something, you kind of sample it, and you ultimately have this kind of consumeristic mentality about church of what is church? Church is we watch the preacher do his TED Talk performance, and we hear our great rock concert, and it's kind of a competition to see which one tickles me the most, right? And here's the problem. And I want you to go to 100 church services all the time. That's just so good. Here's the problem. You don't serve at any of these places because you think it's ultimately about you. No tomatoes yet. You think it's ultimately about you, and here's the news. It's not about you just being a consumer. The church, I am here preaching. Joseph is coming up here leading worship, but you receiving that is really important, but it's not everything. The church is not just a platform for preachers to get their little kicks talking to people. The church is this living, breathing thing where we come together to celebrate the gospel so that we can serve and advance God's kingdom and go outside the church, reach other people, and serve inside the church and build it to see God do incredible things. If you are consuming without serving, you don't really know what church is. You think it's just about you. Now, a lot of you are oh my gosh, okay, here it comes. I know this. This is the preacher, and every preacher goes through this. They get this thing where they're oh crap, we don't have enough volunteers. I'm going to do it. Oh gosh, nobody's going to, I don't want to have to set up the chairs, I got to make sure that they're setting up the chairs, so I'm going to do the guilt trip, the serving guilt trip, right? And so that, they'll get up and they'll do this thing. That's not what I'm doing. I'm actually doing this for your sake. Actually, some of you need to go serve at other churches. That's fine. I want you to serve for your sake. I want you to serve for your sake. And here's why. Because Jesus is radically about to redefine leadership in this next verse. And this will all come together in a second. He says, but whoever wants to become prominent among you, whoever wants to be great among you, if you're looking for greatness, if you're looking for influence, shall be your servant. And whoever desires to be first among you shall be your slave. He's redefining leadership in this way. He's saying leadership is not being served. Leadership is serving. Leadership is serving. Leadership is your opportunity to bless others. When I first got into leadership, I thought it was so I could be awesome and have the kicks and giggles of oh, they like my sermon, and then it hit me at some point in my mid-20s, no, the reason God gives you influence, the reason God gives you power, authority, the reason He gives you leadership is so you can bless other people with it. If you have any ounce of influence, my prayer is that you would wake up every single morning and think, how can I use this to serve other people? How can I use this to love other people? How can I use this to encourage other people? How can I use this to grow other people? How can I use this to invest in other people? That's the heart of this thing. Leadership is your opportunity to bless other people. I want to take a minute and I want to acknowledge some people in this room that are really great examples of it. Luke Wilson back there, always like doing stuff for this church, running slides. Like this place would not, yeah, thank you. This place wouldn't run without you. Michael Elliott, wave your hand. I'm going to brag on you. Yeah. Like, does so much for this church. Serving this church will be the last person to go, the first person there. Zach Beetham, like he is here setting up chairs, and what I realize is most people are like superstars in like a department. No, like we get together in a staff meeting. It's like we wouldn't have been able to do the outreach event if it weren't for Zach. Well, I wouldn't have been able to do Ayana's if it weren't for Zach. We wouldn't have done the kids thing if it were like, oh my gosh, he serves. And some of you don't realize that's actually what real greatness is. That's what leadership is in Jesus' kingdom. And you know what that means? By the time we all get to heaven, like leadership, we're going to think of it completely differently because we're all going to be submitting to Zach. Like we will, like God will give him like a scepter and like make us do whatever he says. So be nice to him now. Like, because that's the way God sees leadership. He promotes the people that serve. He builds the people that humble themselves and serve, which is completely different between the world. And you know what else they do that's really awesome is they show up on time. And they show up when they say they're going to show up. You know, I mean, it's just incredible, you know. And so what we're going to do at the end of this message, we're going to have a time where you can sign up to serve, and Logan's going to go through the details of that. And we want you to sign up to serve because God has given us a mission with this Be Rich thing to really reach people and to really make an incredible impact. If these messages, if the worship time here, if the small groups you've encountered through Yaz have made any impact on your life, I plead with you. Come serve so that we can see it impact more people, so that we can see people who are far from God come in and hear the gospel in a powerful way. Because here's what we're realizing right now. We know we need to get to Be Rich because we're at capacity in this room. We really want to reach that community. We feel like God has called us to do this. And I'm like, Logan, like I look at my team, I'm like, hey, when can we do this? You know, and we've got the money, we've got the resources, we've got the time, but we're looking at each other like, we don't have the volunteers. Like, we don't have the people serving. We don't have people to help set up. We don't have people. We need like 5 Zach Beethams, right? And, you know, in church world, they have a joke. They call it the 80-20 rule, that 20% of the people do 80% of the work. We want to actually, like, everybody comes and serves. Everybody does something, whether it's on the welcome team. Like, the welcome team, that's hospitality. What I see Olivia and Chelsea out there doing, like, that is showing people the love of Jesus and welcoming. I mean, that's an incredible ministry. That's an incredible way to serve, right? We need people to do this because the vision, you don't get to determine, God determined the vision, like to reach more people with this gospel. But what you do get to determine is the pace at which we do it. We've not set a date for when we're going to do Be Rich, and the reason is we need to know that we have enough people behind it, that we have enough people that are signed up to really send this message of the great exchange of the gospel of what Christ has done to that young adult community. As soon as we have enough people, we know we're ready. We need you. We need you. We need you to come. We need you to invite your friends. We need you to invite your friends that are on the edge that you know need to hear more about Jesus. We need you to invite your friends. We need you to come. We need you to serve. We need help stacking chairs. You know, we need help. We need it. And again, this is ultimately not we need it. You need it. You need it. Like, a lot of you think like this is the service guilt trip. I've got something way better for you than the consequences of not serving. It's the rewards of serving. That God encounters people in the midst of service. Back in Alabama, I had a buddy. He was a cooking buddy. Y'all know I love to cook. You can look at me tell, but I love food. And he loved to cook too, and he would cook for people. And I remember a bunch of us went over to his house, and he cooked this incredible stuff, and it was just this layout, and it was spectacular. And I looked at him, and it's like as you came near him, you felt the presence of God. And he was just cooking. I'm like, what is this? You know? I mean, you just felt the beauty of Jesus. It was like the best worship service you've ever been, but just standing near him and he's cooking. And then I realized he wasn't eating anything because he was fasting. And I said, you're fasting. Why are you cooking for people? He goes, you haven't felt the presence of God until you've cooked for people while you fast. You want to experience Jesus in a powerful way? Not for my sake. Sign up to serve. Sign up to serve so you can experience his presence in a powerful way. A lot of you are going to sign up to serve and you're going to start moving chairs and you think like, this is incredible. God comes in the midst of this in a powerful way. Next, Jesus gives us an example of what this service looks like, what this servant leadership that he's advocating for really looks like. Just as the Son of Man did not come to be served, but to serve and to give his life as a ransom for many. Now, in this verse, I want to dive deep. We're going to be a couple minutes late, but not too late. I'm about to kind of go into some theological detail. It will change your life, so take your Ritalin. Hold on with me for the technical stuff because it's profound. Anytime you see this phrase, Son of Man, which you see it a lot in the New Testament, this is a technical term, and it's an allusion back to Daniel chapter 7. Daniel 7 is where we first see this word, and Daniel's a 6th century prophet, and he has this vision of the Son of Man. I'm going to dive into that vision. In this vision, now he's in the 6th century, he sees a winged lion, a bear, a leopard, and then a 10-horned beast. Okay, weird stuff, right? Okay, but it makes sense. If I say bald eagle, what do you see? America, America, right? Okay, if you said winged lion, back in the day, they're like, oh, Babylon, right? These animals are all like natural symbols of these empires. The problem is, except for the winged lion, they all come after Daniel dies. That's spectacular. He sees this winged lion, which is the symbol of the Babylonian Empire. And what happens is the Babylonians reign until 538 when the Medes come along. And what do the Medes do? They overthrow them by making the Babylonians slaves and killing them. And then we have the bear, the Medo-Persian kingdom. They are the reigning kingdom, the Medo-Persians, until 333. Alexander the Great comes through. And what does he do? He defeats the Medo-Persians, makes them his slaves, takes their lives, kills them. And then we have the Greek kingdom come, which is symbolized, you'll see often, as a leopard, right? You have the Greek Empire until 146. But what happens? The Romans come along, and they take the Greeks, they make them their slaves, and they kill them, and they overthrow them, and the Roman kingdom reigns. Now, after he sees this 10-horned beast, which is Rome is often depicted as a 10-horned beast. I mean, it's just amazing that he saw this in the future. He sees something happen. He sees this old man, he calls him the Ancient of Days, who's God himself, come and sit upon a throne. And then he says that he sees not another beast, but one like the Son of Man, a human, come right up to God himself. And now, not a beast, but a man, the Son of Man, is seated on his throne. What Daniel didn't fully understand yet, that this Son of Man was Jesus. And he wasn't like these other empires that made the empire before them slaves and killed them to make his kingdom. Jesus did something very different. Jesus came and he served and became their slaves. This kingdom was ruled by a slave. And instead of coming after the Roman Empire and killing the Romans like they all expected, he let the Romans kill him. He gave up his life as a ransom for many. Why did he give up his life? As a ransom. Now, when you see this word ransom, what does it mean? The word ransom means it means an exchange for a slave, often to purchase them out of slavery, to emancipate them. He gave up his life. He died on the cross as a ransom to buy a slave. Now, why would someone buy a slave out of slavery? It's a very odd thing to do. Why would you emancipate someone? Well, let me swing back around. Remember all those times I mentioned inheritance, right, and sonship? When I say the word adoption, becoming a son, you typically think of adopting a child. In the Roman Empire, you didn't adopt children. Whenever they saw adoption of somebody becoming an heir, adoption, do you know who you would adopt? Slaves. Adoption was when someone of wealth who had stature decided they didn't have an heir, and so they would adopt their faithful slave and make them the heir of their empire. Adoption of slaves as heirs. Adoption was what you did to a slave to make them an heir. This is Christ's ransom. It was the great exchange. Here's what he's done. He comes to us, his faithful servants, and takes our slavery upon himself. And in exchange, he gives us a throne at his right hand to reign with him, and he gives us leadership in his eternal kingdom. That's the way the kingdom works, is the way to get to the top is to become a servant. That's Jesus' way, so that he adopts you and gives you an inheritance. That's why we come together every time, is to celebrate this great exchange and to celebrate and remember the price that was paid for us. God, we come before you today because we want you to use us. We want you to use us to further your kingdom, God. We want to be your servants. We want to be your slaves, God. We look up at a throne, and the throne is not occupied by a tyrant. Our throne is not occupied by a madman like the rest of the world, but we look upon a throne occupied by a slave. And tonight, we want to celebrate that. Tonight, we want to celebrate that we looked and sought after a king, but when we discovered you, we discovered a beautiful, beautiful slave. Come and fill us up. We want to serve you.